Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll dive into one of Tai Chi's most fundamental techniques, rollback. On the surface, it looks simple, but hidden inside is the key to understanding how the waist and the hips create power in all of Tai Chi. I'll use rollback as a jumping off point to look at how the waist and the hips create power and movement. Along the way, we'll look at all 8 of the Tai Chi fundamental energies and techniques. When we get down to it, all of these energies and techniques can be defined by how we rotate the waist and power with the hips. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Todd Martin, creator of the Tai Chi Code. If you already practice Tai Chi, I'll ask you to watch this video with an open mind because I might be challenging the way you currently think about waist rotation. Not because traditional teaching is wrong, but it might leave out some of the details that I think I will be covering in this video. If you're new to Tai Chi, I hope my explanation is so clear that it seems very logical to you right from the get-go. As you watch the video, I do want you to drop me a comment and let me know, is this similar to what you've learned before, or is this very different? And if it's very different, do you find this approach logical, or does it seem disagreeable to you? If you disagree with what I'm saying, please do leave me a comment. I want to hear comments from everybody, but especially if you disagree. However, if you do disagree, be a little bit detailed in why you disagree so we can have a discussion. To get us started, I'm going to begin with a demonstration of ward off and the transition to rollback that we would see in the most traditional sequence of grasp the sparrow's tail. This may be performed different ways in different schools, so bear with me with the way I'm going to demonstrate it, but I'm also going to show some variations later on in the video so we can see the similarities and the differences and how the rotation of the waist affects those. I'm going to begin in a vertical ball carrying position as opposed to a horizontal ball carrying position, and we're going to step out onto the heel in a roughly shoulder width stance. And then what you're going to do is sit back on your rear leg by tucking the pelvis as you roll your right arm up so the palm is directed towards your face and the left palm is directed towards the right palm. That's going to be our beginning position. And then we're going to shift the weight forward until we get to this stopping point where your knee is about over your ankle. And the right arm should be bowed out in a curved fashion. That's part of the ward off or pang energy, expanding like a balloon or a ball. And when we get to here, now we're going to begin a transition where the waist rotates, and I'll explain this in great detail later. Once we get to this position where the left palm is up, right palm is out, now we're going to roll back, shifting the weight all the way back towards our rear leg. Now here is where we would typically transition into press and push. Instead of transitioning to press and push, we're going to sit back and circle the right arm up into our original starting position. And again, perform ward off, turn the waist, and then roll back. And we're going to just continue to do this a couple of times so you can get the visual look of it. And if you're practicing along with me, you can get the feel of it. Let's look from the side view. The right arm is bowed out as we shift forward, turn the waist, and then we roll back. Keep in mind as we do this, every movement is going to be guided by rotation of the waist and powered by the hips. All right, hopefully now we have some of the look and the feel of ward off and rollback. Now I'm going to begin discussing some of the waist movement and the hip movement, and I believe that you'll see right away why it is important to understand the specifics. I'm going to begin with the ward off from this position. And what we will need to understand as we do each movement is that every movement in Tai Chi is going to be controlled by the waist rotation and the hip power, but it is rarely explained very specifically what that waist rotation is, because it isn't just your whole torso turning to the left or turning to the right. Our spine is divided into multiple segments. We have our neck, which in this case is going to stay aligned with our sternum as we do each movement. And then we have our thoracic spine in the chest. And then we have our lumbar spine in the lower back. And then we have the sacroiliac spine in the pelvis. All of these elements of the spine can move independently because of how our muscles are structured. We have our upper part of the chest, or the upper torso, that is going to be guided in rotation by these muscles here called the external obliques that are on either side of our rib cage connecting down into the pelvis, and that is what's going to turn the upper waist. You can use your arms to reflect the rotation of the upper waist muscles, those external obliques. Those muscles move independently from the rotation from our internal obliques that are beneath or deep to the external obliques and are the rotational levers of our lower abs. You can think of the belly button reflecting the lower ab rotation. The internal oblique lower abs are going to turn either back and to the right from the right internal obliques, or back and to the left from our left internal obliques. On the same side of the body, the external obliques and internal obliques turn in opposite directions. Very important to understand. And then we have the power that comes from our hip joints, but the hips, in addition to power, also create rotation. We move from either one hip or the other. And here you can see if I flex my right hip like this, you can see how that has a pulling effect towards that side. So the right hip is going to flex, causing me to turn clockwise. But each one of those movements is going to have to be coordinated with the lower ab rotation and the upper ab rotation at the same time. Now, when I extend my hip using the glutes, so the hip flexors are in front and the glutes, the extensors, are in back. If I use the glutes, they turn the body towards the other side, essentially pushing me to the left or counterclockwise. If I stand this way, you can see it a little more clearly. My right hip is either going to flex, pulling me towards the right, or extend, pushing me towards the left. We coordinate that with our lower ab rotation and our upper ab rotation. That coordination gives us only 8 specific options for combinations of waist rotation and hip actions. And I believe by my analysis, those 8 options correlate with the 8 energies of Tai Chi and the trigrams, which I will explain bit by bit as we go through this. So first, let's look at ward off and rollback. Let's begin with ward off and what is happening in the waist and in the hip. In ward off, which is represented in the trigrams by 3 yang lines, the most aggressive or offensive energy, we have the upper waist reflected by my right arm turning in the direction of my hip that is going to be active and extending. So when I say hip extending, I mean the glutes in the back pushing the body towards the other side, or in this case, pushing it forward, projecting energy off the ground. My upper abs turn towards that hip as it's pushing, and the lower abs are also going to turn in the direction of the extending hip. And that is what's creating this outward bubble of energy. All of the waist rotation is turning counterclockwise toward the hip, which is pushing off the ground, and that is creating this expansion of my arm. So it's not just me moving my arm from the shoulder, it's the entire core projecting off the hip and the ground at the same time, creating this energy and creating this bowed out arm, which is hard to penetrate because you'd have to penetrate the entire core and the ground at the same time. From the side view, upper waist turning to the left, lower abs turning to the left as I extend from the glutes off the ground, and that is creating this expansive energy. Now we have to turn the waist to the right. This is no longer ward off once we begin turning the waist. Every time we switch any element of the core, we are changing the energy to a different energy. We're going to begin one element at a time. We're going to take the lower abs while we continue the upper waist and the hip in the same motion. I'm going to take my belly button, reflecting the lower abs, and I'm going to turn it to the right. So now no longer projecting off my left leg. And this is what's going to happen. It's going to begin turning the arms out. And I'll explain a little later, this is a very specific one of the Tai Chi 8 energies. You probably haven't heard that before. If you have, then let me know in the comments. And please do leave me comments as you watch the video, and let me know if this fits with the way you've been taught before, or if this is new to you. So I just did the lower abs, and then now I'm going to switch the upper abs from turning left, reflected by my right arm, and I'm going to turn it to the right. And so now you can see that is going to finish off that change in the arm position. It was one movement at a time. First the lower abs, then the upper abs. When we do it in continuity, it just looks like one motion. So now we are set up in a position with a extended hip, an extended hip from the glutes, and the upper and lower waist turning away from that extending hip. I'm going to explain to you in a bit why that is the Tai Chi energy of shoulder strike, even though we don't see a shoulder strike happening here. Now we are going to go into the rollback, and what I'm going to say here may differ with what you've been taught in the past, because as we roll back, most people are thinking, or at least this is what I see, of turning the body to the left. But in fact, when we roll back, we are turning the entire core to the right, into the flexing hip. So let's get back here. I now have my upper and lower waist turning to the right, and I'm going to flex the right hip. Remember, flexing the hip pulls the body in that direction, and it allows the waist muscles to be received into the flexing hip, as opposed to an extending hip. When we extend the hip, the waist muscles are projected off of the extending hip. When we flex the hip, they are received by that flexing hip. So they are received into the flexing hip, and it causes the entire body to retreat backward. And because we're going from right leg to left leg, the body is going to move from right to left, which can give the illusion that we're turning the waist to the left. But I am still turning the entire core to the right as this happens. Everything is turning to the right. Upper waist, lower waist, into the flexing hip. That is the rollback. From the side view, lower abs turn to the right, upper abs turn to the right. And now I flex the right hip, and that creates the rollback. So if we think about empty and full with each part of the body, as I do the rollback, it's not this arm that is full. It's this arm that is connected to the active part of my upper waist that is pulling backward, because it is turning, and that is where the active energy is. At the moment I'm doing that, this arm is the passive arm, or the empty arm. That is the rollback. So we have ward off, the left hip extending, lower and upper abs turning to the left. Then I'm going to turn the lower abs to the right, which I'll explain with the trigrams later is the energy of pluck. And then we turn the upper abs to the right to complete this motion, which I will explain is the energy of shoulder strike. And then we flex the right hip, creating the rollback. And so now we've seen multiple of the Tai Chi energies, and I'm going to show you in a bit where you can find all 8 of those energies within Grasp the Sparrow's Tail. Now that we have gone through ward off and transitioned to rollback and Grasp the Sparrow's Tail, I'm going to transition us now into the press and the push that are going to finish off Grasp the Sparrow's Tail. And while doing so, I'm going to further clarify what's going on with the waist muscles of the core. And then I'm going to now start to correlate these movements with the trigram energies, because by using the trigrams, we can, in a way, start to verify if we are doing what we think we are doing. But I understand that there is not any accepted explanation of the Tai Chi trigrams in terms of our core anatomy, but I'm trying to make that correlation for you here today, and you can drop me a comment and let me know if this makes sense to you. So I'll just begin with the ward off. The trigram has 3 solid lines representing yang energy. And in the Tai Chi code, what I have established is the first or top line is representing the hip energy. If it is hip extension from the glutes, that is yang, pushing us towards our opponent. If it is hip flexion, that is yin, or a broken line. And then the second line of the trigram is going to be the upper waist rotation. If we're turning towards the extending hip, it is going to project that arm outward, making turning towards an extending hip a yang movement versus turning away from an extending hip is more of a yin movement. So in ward off, we have a yang hip, first line, yang upper torso, second line, and then the lower abs are also going to follow the same principle as the upper abs, meaning if you turn the lower abs towards the extending hip, that's also yang, and that gives us 3 yang lines for the trigram. When we begin to transition here, turning the lower abs, now we have a still extending left hip, yang, which is the top line. We still have the upper abs turning towards the extending hip. So the second line of the trigram is still going to be solid yang, but we've turned the lower abs away. And so turning away from the extending hip is going to be yin. So top line solid, middle line solid, bottom line broken, that is pluck. If I simply change my arm position to something like single whip, it'll become more clear. That's single whip, which is pluck. I'm turning the upper abs towards the extending hip, lower abs away. So this is ward off pluck just by turning the lower abs. We also see pluck in pickup needles at C bottom, extending the hip, turning the upper abs towards the extending hip, turning the lower abs away from the extending hip. All versions of pluck. And then when we finally turn the upper waist away from the extending hip, now we have a solid line for the hip and 2 broken lines for line number 2 and line number 3, and that is going to be shoulder strike, which is the same core movement I would be doing here, turning the upper waist and the lower waist away from the extending hip. That is shoulder strike. Just a little bit more obvious here as a shoulder strike. But to add a little extra nuance here, because there's a couple versions of shoulder strike, the active hip can be our standing hip, but it also can be our swing hip. So we, after raise hands and shoulder strike, we have this version of it that transitions to crane cools its wings. That itself is a shoulder strike because the hip is extending and the upper and the lower waist are turning away from it. So that is the same energy of shoulder strike as if I were to do the movement here of shoulder strike, upper and lower waist turning away from the extending hip. So that is shoulder strike. We've already seen now rollback, flexing hip, broken line, lower abs turning into the flexing hip is also yin because it's being received and retreating away from our opponent. Same thing for the upper abs, all retreating into the flexing hip, creating 3 yin lines, which is rollback. And then we're going to transition to the press. But there's 2 separate movements that occur in the transition. Just like when we transitioned to rollback from ward off, we had 2 waist rotations to do that. We're going to have 2 waist rotations here after the rollback to get us ready to press. First, I'm going to turn the lower abs to the left, bringing me here. That is going to be the trigram for split. I have a flexing hip, upper waist turning towards the flexing hip, lower waist turning away from the flexing hip. So the lower ab is going to be a solid line, whereas the other 2 are going to be broken lines. And then I'm going to complete the transition by turning the upper waist to the left, and that allows me to sink into this position. And this position is elbow strike. Flexing hip, upper and lower waist turning away from the flexing hip. Now we're ready to do the press. Here is the press, and then we open up to push and then push forward. And I'm not going to go into very much detail on the press and the push because that's not the focus of this video, but just to look at the trigrams in the press, I have a flexing left hip. I'm going to flex the left hip, lower abs are turning back into the left, upper abs are turning forward and to the right. So that is going to be press. Top line broken, middle line turning away from the flexing hip is solid. So middle line of press is going to be solid. And then bottom line, lower abs turning towards the flexing hip, yin. So bottom line is going to be broken. Then I'm going to turn this flexing hip into an extending hip by activating the glutes. And that turns press into push. That is what opens the arms up and parallel. That's a flexing hip. And once I turn the flexing hip into an extending hip, it opens the arms. And then now I have push going forward, and I'm going to reverse this to push going backward. Extending off my right hip, upper waist turning to the left, lower abs turning to the right. That is push going backwards. Or you'll commonly see this withdrawal movement before the final push. That withdrawal is not a push. That withdrawal is a press. So this was a push, extending hip from the glutes. This is a press, flexing hip from the hip flexors. Upper and lower waist still moving in the same direction. Then I reverse again to push on this side, glutes, lower abs, upper abs, pushing. Even though it seems like both arms are pushing equally, the core energy is coming from the left side as we do the push. Now we'll do the entire grasp the sparrow's tail sequence. I'm going to close off with an exercise in this side stance, going from roll back to ward off, and then roll back to ward off on the other side, so we can see the transitions from a different angle. Beginning here, roll back, ward off, and then we're transitioning to here, and then now roll back, ward off, and then transitioning. And so you may be able to see clearly now what is a transition and what is the actual movement. This is the rollback, turning the upper and lower waist towards the flexing left hip. Then I simply extend the left hip, beginning this motion. I'm now doing ward off just by changing the hip from flexion to extension. And then now I'm transitioning by turning the lower abs. I'm now in pluck, and then upper abs, I'm now in shoulder strike, and then ready for roll back on this side. Roll back, ward off, pluck, shoulder strike. Roll back, ward off, pluck, shoulder strike. Those are all the transitions of our core waist muscles. I'm going to do one final demonstration for the purpose of clarity, and that is the different entrance into ward off and roll back that is commonly seen in grasp the sparrow's tail, where we are beginning from the horizontal ball carrying position, not the vertical ball carrying position. Because here, ward off is performed like this, which looks similar to parting the wild horse's mane, except the arm is bowed out rather than palm facing up, as we would see in parting the wild horse's mane. So this is ward off, the same as I did this was ward off. If we're doing the 108 form, we'll see this here, stepping out, and then that's the version of ward off. That version is two different movements. First, after the step out, is pluck, followed by ward off. Lower abs going to the left, then completing by going to the right. You can see that slowly here. That is pluck, and then we finish off with ward off. It of course looks like one movement when we string them together, but it's two movements. And then we can transition to grasp the sparrow's tail right, either by stepping up into a vertical ball carrying position, and this is what I did, or you'll see a version where we sink back and then we transition to a horizontal ball carrying position and step out. And that's where you're going to get here the pluck followed by ward off. The same transition will apply, lower abs, then upper abs, then rollback. I hope this really clarifies some of the core waist rotation and hip energy in Tai Chi, and you can apply this to all of your other practice, and I hope it provides some greater clarity. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.